hears it before he understands it. A grinding under his feet, a long wooden sound, alive, running through the ship from keel to deck. He's below when it begins. He's a midshipman, 17 years old. His hands are raw. His coat is wet through to the lining. He's not slept in 2 days. The lamp above him swings in a slow, sick arc, and the shadow of it crosses his face and crosses it again. The grinding stops, then it comes back, louder. Above him, men are shouting. The shouts run together. He cannot make out words. He puts his hand against the bulkhead and feels the wood shudder under his palm. Then he hears it, from the deck, a single word. Rocks. He's on his feet before he knows he has moved. The ladder is ahead of him in the dark, and he climbs it as the ship lurches and throws him sideways into the rungs. His shoulder strikes wood, his head strikes wood. He keeps climbing. On the upper deck, the wind takes him. It's past midnight. The sky is the colour of slate. Rain comes down sideways and the spray comes with it. He cannot see 20 feet. He can hear breakers somewhere ahead of him, very close. The canvas above him is cracking like gunfire. Some men are running, some are not. Some of them are sick where they stand. Scurvy has thinned them down to faces. He sees the gunner by the main mast, hauling on a line with 3 men he does not recognise. He sees a lieutenant shouting at no one in particular. He does not see the captain. Then the ship strikes. It's not like a wall. It's like the sea has reached up under the keel. It's lifted them up and let them down again on something hard. The deck pitches forward. Men go forward with it. A great length of timber comes down somewhere behind him and he hears it hit the water before he hears it hit the deck. The ship strikes a second time, then a third. The mainmast comes apart somewhere above him. He does not see it. He hears it. He feels the whole ship lean under him as the weight comes off and the rigging comes down across the deck in great wet ropes. Men are running past him from all directions. Then he sees the captain. Cheap has come up last. He stands on the quarterdeck with his coat half on and one arm held tight against his side. He's looking past the bow, into the dark, towards the breakers. He's shouting. He is not moving. He watches him and waits for the order. But the order doesn't come. The Wager was a British warship. She had crossed an ocean to wage war on Spain. She had rounded Cape Horn with a squadron of 6 ships under Commodore George Anson. And somewhere in that rounding, she had fallen behind. Now she was breaking apart on an unmapped coast in Patagonia in the autumn of 1741. Of the 140 men aboard her, some would live, some would not. And those who lived would never agree on what happened next. So what happens to a captain when his ship is gone from under him? What happens to the men he commands? And on an empty coast, with no king's law for 1,000 miles, what holds them together and what rips them apart? You're listening to The Crow's Tales, and this is the wreck of the HMS Wager. "18 months before the wreck, a different captain had stood on that same quarterdeck. He was an old man for the Navy. He had served his time in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean, and he had been given the Wager because she was the kind of ship a man got at the end of his career. She was a 6th rate, the smallest class of warship the Royal Navy still rated for the line. She had been an East Indiaman before the Admiralty brought her out and rebuilt her for war. The decks were too cluttered, the hull was sluggish. She would be slow, even in a squadron of 6. The squadron was Commodore George Anson's. Its orders were a state secret. It was bound for the Pacific, where Spain held an empire and the Royal Navy did not. The war with Spain had begun 2 years earlier, in 1739, and London had decided that the only way to hurt Spain was to hurt her trade. There was one ship in particular the Admiralty wanted. Each year, a great galleon crossed from Acapulco to Manila carrying the silver of the New World. The galleon was Anson's prize. If he could, he was also to burn Spanish ports and rouse Spanish colonies on the way. The squadron sailed from St. Helens in September of 1740. 6 warships and 3 smaller vessels carrying stores. Just under 2,000 men. Anson had asked the Admiralty for soldiers. The voyage was meant to land men ashore on the Spanish colonies, and a crew of seamen could not do that. The Admiralty had agreed and then not delivered. The regular regiments were needed elsewhere. In the place of the soldiers, Anson was given 500 pensioners from the Chelsea hospital. Men who had once been soldiers and now were not. Some of them were in their 60s. Some were in their 70s. Some of them were missing limbs. They had been told they were to do garrison duty in Jamaica. When they understood where the squadron was bound, more than half of them deserted on the march down to Portsmouth. The ones who could not desert because they could not walk were carried aboard on stretchers. By the time the squadron made Madeira, a man had died of fever. By the time they reached the Brazilian coast, 3 more were dead. By the time they had begun the rounding of Cape Horn, the Wager's captain was dead too. But that was later. In the early months of the voyage, the Wager was a ship like any other. She kept a king's discipline, she kept a king's watch. A man of war ran on bells. The ship's day was 8 watches of 4 hours each, broken by 2 short watches in the evening so that the same men did not always stand the same hours. The bell rang every half hour. At every bell, a man wrote it down in the log. The hierarchy ran straight down. The captain held a commission from the king. Below him, the lieutenants. Below them, the warrant officers. Men of long service who held the ship's craft in their hands. The master, who answered for navigation. The gunner, who answered for the great guns and the powder. The boatswain, the carpenter, the surgeon. Below them, the midshipmen. Young men who hoped one day to be officers, who slept in a screened-off corner of the lower deck and were sworn at by everyone above them. Below them, the seamen, who were paid, when they were paid, less than a London labourer earned in dry weather. The thing that held this pyramid together was the lash. A man could be flogged for drunkenness, for theft, for striking another man, for sleeping on watch, for cursing an officer, for being slow. The flogging happened on deck, in front of the assembled crew. The offender was stripped to the waist and tied to a wooden grating. The number of lashes was read out before they began. 12 for a small offence, 24 for a serious one. The men watching were not allowed to look away. It was not love that held a king's ship together. It was the certainty of consequence. In the first months of the voyage, this system worked. John Bulkeley was the gunner of the Wager. He was in his 30s, English, and he kept a journal in a small, careful hand. He was a religious man, given to long sentences about providence. He did not drink to excess. He did not curse beyond what was customary. The gunner of a man of war answered for the great guns and the powder magazine, which meant he answered for whether the ship could fight at all. Bulkeley took his work seriously. He believed the Navy was a place where competent men rose by competence. There were others: Robert Baines, a lieutenant, steady and tired; Henry Cousins, a midshipman who drank too much; and the youngest midshipman aboard, John Byron, 17 years old, the second son of an English baron, on his first long voyage and trying not to show how badly the sea took him. He had not chosen the Navy. He had been sent to sea at 14 because that was what second sons did. In the Atlantic, the squadron did what squadrons did. The Wager kept her place at the back of the formation and kept up as well as she could. The men kept their watches. The bell rang at every half hour. Provisions came up from the hold in the routine the Navy had perfected over 100 years of war. Salted beef, salted pork, hard biscuit, beer until the beer ran out, then watered rum. Men were given vinegar against scurvy. However, the vinegar did not work. Scurvy was the Navy's oldest enemy. It came on slowly, then all at once. A man's gums began to bleed. His old wounds, long healed, opened up again. Scars from a fight in his youth split and ran. His teeth loosened in their sockets. His legs swelled and turned black. His breath rotted in his mouth so that men around him knew his condition before he did. By the time he could not even stand, he was usually a week away from dying. There were old hands aboard who had survived the bout in the past, but they were the lucky ones, and they were not the rule. The rule was that the disease, once it came on hard, killed you. No one knew why. There were theories, but none of them worked. By the time the squadron reached the Brazilian coast, men were beginning to die. The Wager's captain was one of them. He had been ill for some time. He died in the first week of December and was buried at sea. Command passed briefly to George Murray, a senior officer in the squadron, but a few weeks later, the captain of the Pearl also died. The Pearl was a larger ship than the Wager and a better posting, and Anson moved Murray over to take command of her. The Wager was left needing another captain. Anson chose his own first lieutenant from the flagship. His name was David Cheap. He was a Scotsman in his late 30s. He had served in the Navy for nearly 20 years and had never had a command of his own. He was Anson's man. The Commodore trusted him. The men of the Wager did not know him. He came aboard in March of 1741, in the cold latitudes south of Brazil. He made his speech to the assembled crew, which was the speech a new captain made, and the crew listened with the attention they paid to a captain they had not yet decided about. He was a strict man. He inspected the magazine, he inspected the watches, he corrected. He read the articles of war on Sundays in a hard accent the men did not warm to. After all, he was a Scotsman, and the Navy was still a Navy that remembered Jacobites. He had inherited a tired ship. The Wager had been the slowest in the squadron from the start. She was now also the sickest. Scurvy was in the hold. 3 or 4 men were dying every week. The salt provisions were running short. The water was bad. Then they began the rounding. Cape Horn was where the Atlantic met the Pacific. The weather there came out from the south, unbroken by any land. Ships rounded it east to west against the prevailing wind. They went south first to clear the worst of it, into latitudes where the cold killed in hours, then clawed west and north into the Pacific. The southern winter of 1741 was particularly bad. Of the rounding, Bulkeley wrote in his journal that he had not believed such weather was possible. He had seen storms in the Channel. He had seen storms in the Atlantic. He had seen nothing like this. The wind blew from the west for 50 days without stopping. The seas were higher than the masts. The cold was so deep that men's hands froze to the rigging and could not be pulled away without losing the skin. Sails split, spars came down. The pumps ran day and night, and the men at them died at the handle and were carried away and replaced. The squadron was scattered. The ships that survived limped north into the Pacific one by one, weeks apart, some of them with half their crews dead. The Wager came through. She did not come through whole. Of the 140 men still aboard her, more than half were sick. The dead went over the side in canvas, waited with shot when there was shot to spare, and waited with stone when there was not. The watches were thinned and thinned again. The men still standing were standing on legs that were beginning to swell. The bell still rang every half hour. The log was still kept, but there were nights when there were not enough hands to bring in the sail, and so the sail was not brought in. She had naturally been at the back of the squadron when the storms began, and she was further back now. She had lost sight of the others. Somewhere in the wind and the spray she had taken a heading her officers no longer trusted. Cheap was determined to make for the rendezvous, an island called Socorro on the Chilean coast that the Commodore had named as the place to gather. She did not find the rendezvous. She found land. On the morning of the 13th of May, in calmer weather, Cheap came up on deck and slipped on a wet ladder. He fell. He landed on his shoulder and the bone broke. The surgeon bound his arm against his side and put him in his cabin. He was below decks, drugged, when the lookout sighted breakers ahead. The lieutenant of the watch was Baines. He was steady and tired and not a man to rouse a sleeping captain on a question of navigation. He waited too long. By the time the breakers were close enough to see clearly, it was too late to come about. By the time the captain came up on decks, the rocks had already taken her. The Wager broke apart in pieces over the next 2 days. Some of the men got off the ship, others did not. Of the 140 aboard her on the night of the wreck, around 100 reached the shore alive. The rest drowned or froze or were crushed by the timbers. The bodies came in on the tide for a week. The shore was a black beach below a forest of low, wet trees. The trees ran down nearly to the waterline. Behind them rose ground that climbed quickly into rock and bog. There were no inhabitants on the shore that the men could see. There was no shelter. There was no game in the trees. The sea came in cold and the rain colder. The first night, the survivors slept where they had landed, in the wet, without fire. In the morning, they began to do what shipwrecked men did. They walked the beach. They picked up what the sea brought in. They counted heads. The ship was still there, broken on the rocks, half submerged but holding. They went out to her in the longboat and the cutter and started bringing things off. Barrels of pork, casks of biscuit, kegs of brandy, sailcloth for tents, the spare cordage, the carpenter's tools, the powder. They worked for a week. Then a storm came and broke the rest of her, and the salvage stopped. By the end of the first week they had a camp on the beach, a row of canvas tents under the trees, a storehouse made of spars and sail, a cook fire under a lean-to. They had food for perhaps 3 months at strict rations. They had powder and shot. They had no charts of the coast they were on, no clear knowledge of where they were, and no boat large enough to carry them all anywhere. Cheap was their captain. The Wager was lost. The two facts sat next to each other, and the men did not know what to do with them. In the Navy, the captain's commission was held by his ship. It was not in his pocket. It was in her timbers. When she went to the bottom, the commission went with her. There were articles of war that covered the rights of officers after a wreck, but they were ambiguous, and they had never been tested in a place like this. And for the first weeks, no one tested them. The men kept watches on the beach as if they were on a ship. They saluted the captain. They drew their rations from the purser. They obeyed orders. But there were small things. Cheap could not lift his arm. The shoulder had not set well, and the surgeon had bound it again. He moved among the men slowly, in pain, with his sleeve pinned. He gave fewer orders than he had on the ship. He spent more time in his tent. He had a junior officer carry messages for him. The cold did not get better. The wet did not get better. The food was running low. A man went to the forest to find game and did not come back. 2 men went out the next day to look for him and brought back his coat. 2 more men deserted on the 3rd day, and they were not pursued. There was nowhere to pursue them to. In the 2nd month, the question began to be asked. It was asked at first, not in words but in slowness. Orders were obeyed late. The watch on the storehouse was kept by men who did not seem quite awake. Articles read out at the Sunday muster were heard with the attention given to a story everyone had heard before. The men were not yet refusing. They were not yet arguing. They were waiting to see. John Bulkeley was waiting too. Bulkeley, as the gunner, was below the captain and the lieutenants. He was the only senior warrant officer left in working order. He held his journal in his tent at night, and he had wrote what the day had given him. He wrote that the men were quiet. He wrote that the captain was in pain. He wrote that the rations would not last long if no game came in. He did not yet write what he was thinking about, but he was thinking about it. The thought was a question. It was the question every man in the camp would soon have to answer for himself. The captain's commission was held by his ship. The ship was on the rocks. So what did that mean for the men on the beach? Bulkeley believed in the Navy. He had said so often enough. He had served his time. He had kept his ship's guns ready. He had done what was asked of him. And now he was on a beach at the end of the world, with a captain who could not even lift his arm, and food for 10 more weeks at best. He read the articles of war. He read them carefully. The articles said that an officer's authority over his men in matters of obedience and discipline persisted while they were in His Majesty's service. The articles also said that a man's pay was reckoned from the day he joined the ship to the day his ship was paid off, or wrecked, or lost. From the day she was wrecked, no man on the Wager was being paid. A captain who was not paying his men, a man of war that was not a man of war, an island with no king's writ and no king's harbour and no king's law. Bulkeley closed the book. He did not yet say what he had read, but he started to talk to the carpenter, John Cummins, who was his friend, about the longboat. The longboat had come ashore intact. She was 27 feet long. With work, with timber from the wreck, she could be enlarged. She could be decked over. She could be made to carry men a long way out at sea. South, perhaps, through the Strait of Magellan, around to Brazil, and then home. He did not yet say this to the captain, because there was another problem. His name was Henry Cousins. Cousins was a midshipman, 26 years old, a man who should have already been made lieutenant and had not. He drank. He had drunk on the ship, and he had drunk on the beach. He had a quarrel with the purser over the rations. He believed that the purser was holding back his share. He said so often and loudly, and Cheap had him confined to his tent more than once for it. This problem reached its boiling point in the second week of June. It's morning. The rain has stopped for the first time in 3 days. There is a thin sun over the trees. Bulkeley is at his tent, by the powder magazine, cleaning a piece of iron that had begun to rust. He hears the shouting before he sees it. The shouting is at the storehouse. He cannot make out words from where he stands. He can hear that one of the voices is Cousins. He can hear that the other is the purser. He has heard both of these voices arguing before. They've argued for weeks. He puts down the iron and walks over. The storehouse is a low structure of canvas and spars at the edge of the camp. There is a small group of men gathered. Cousins is in the middle of them. He has a wineskin in one hand. He is shouting at the purser through the canvas. The purser is inside, refusing to come out. Cousins is drunk. Bulkeley stops at the edge of the group. He does not step in. He thinks the captain will come, and the captain will order Cousins confined again, and that will be the end of it. Then the captain comes. Cheap has heard the shouting too. He comes down the path from his tent at the speed a man with a broken shoulder can come, which is faster than Bulkeley would have thought possible. He has his coat on. He has a pistol in his good hand, and he makes a show of cocking it. The men around the storehouse see him and step back. Cousins does not see him. Cousins has his back to the path. He is still shouting at the canvas. He's calling him a thief. He's calling him every name under the sun. Cheap stops about 10 paces from Cousins. He raises the pistol with his good arm. The arm is shaking, slightly at the wrist. The pistol is held level with Cousins' head. He shouts a single word. Bulkeley hears it. Mutineer. Cousins turns. He sees the captain. He sees the pistol. He puts up his hand. It's not the hand of attack. Bulkeley sees that very clearly. Cousins is drunk, and his hand is up and he is not coming forward. He is standing where he stood. He is looking at the captain. There is a long moment. Bulkeley does not know how long, but it feels long. There is deathly silence, broke only by the slow lapping of waves against the shore and Bulkeley's heart beating in his chest. No one in the group around them is moving. Bulkeley thinks the captain will lower the pistol. He thinks the captain will see what Bulkeley is seeing. But the captain fires. The shot is loud. The smoke is white in the cold air. Bulkeley does not look away. He watches Cousins go down. The midshipman does not fall straight. He turns half around like a man trying to remember something. Then his knees go. Then he is on the sand. The men around the storehouse do not move. The captain lowers the pistol. He doesn't move either. He stands with his coat half on and his good arm at his side, and he looks at the man on the ground. He says loud enough for the men around the storehouse to hear, "This man is a mutineer." He says it a second time, as if he felt the first time didn't quite land. Cousins is alive. Bulkeley can hear him breathing. He can see his chest moving. The shot has taken him in the cheek, below the eye, and there is a great deal of blood. The blood is making a small dark patch on the sand under his head, but he is alive, and he begins to make a sickening noise, a low, slow, animal groan. One of his hands is moving, and his hand finds his face and comes away wet. The surgeon pushes his way through the group. He goes to one knee in the sand and gets his hand under Cousins' head and lifts it. He calls for water, he calls for cloth, and a boy runs. The captain interjects, "Do not treat him." The surgeon does not look up. The captain says it again. He says, "Leave him where he is." The surgeon then turns Cousins' head to the side and looks into the wound. The bone is broken. He is feeling for the ball with his fingers. He cannot find it. The boy comes back with a tin of water and the surgeon takes it without looking. The captain takes a step forward. He still has the pistol. He has not lowered it all the way. Bulkeley moves. He does not know he has moved until he is standing at the edge of the path between the captain and the surgeon. He's not blocking the captain. He's just standing there. He is the gunner of the Wager. He has a right to stand on a path in his own camp. The captain looks at him. The captain looks at him for a long second. And then he looks past him at the surgeon, who is now pouring water into the wound. The captain looks around at the men at the storehouse, who are not moving and are not speaking, and are watching him with a quality of attention Bulkeley has never seen before on a deck or on a beach. The captain turns and he walks back up the path to his tent. The pistol, as he lowers it fully, is still smoking. Cousins didn't die at once. He lingered. He was carried after the second day to a sailcloth shelter at the far end of the beach, away from the captain's line of sight. He was conscious sometimes. He was not conscious other times. The shot had broken his cheekbone and lodged behind the eye. There was no surgery to be done that could be done on a beach. The men of the camp visited him in turns, when the captain was not watching. They sat with him. They held water to his mouth. They did not speak of the shooting. He died on a Tuesday morning, 14 days after the captain had fired. He was buried in the sand above the high water mark, in his clothes. The morning he died, the camp was very quiet. And after that, the camp was a different camp. The captain still gave orders, the men still obeyed, but the obedience had changed in shape. Where before there had been the obedience of a navy, there was now the obedience of men who had decided between themselves what they would and what they wouldn't do. When the captain gave an order that fitted with what they had decided, they obeyed it. When he gave an order that did not, they obeyed it more slowly. And the captain then found it easier not to give those orders than to push them. Bulkeley spoke to Cummins more openly now. They walked along the beach in the evenings, and they talked about the longboat. They began to draw plans on a piece of canvas. With timbers from the wreck, she could be lengthened from the 27 feet to 40. She could be decked over, and she could carry 60 men at sea in close quarters for several months. The question they did not yet answer aloud was where she should go. The captain wanted north. North was Socorro, where the rendezvous had been ordered, where Anson, if Anson had survived, was waiting. North was the original mission. North was the chain of command. Bulkeley wanted south. South was the Strait of Magellan, 400 miles of cold water. Beyond the strait was the Atlantic, where they could sail up to Brazil, which was Portuguese and friendly. From Brazil, men could go home. In late summer, when the longboat was nearly finished, Bulkeley wrote a paper. It set out in numbered articles a case for going south. It cited the articles of war on the matter of pay. It cited the condition of the men. It cited the absence of any reasonable hope of finding Anson. It was signed by Bulkeley and by Cummins and by a number of the warrant officers and by most of the seamen. It was not signed by the captain. It was given to him in the morning, on a fair day in October, and the captain read it standing in front of his tent, in his bound coat. He did not say anything for a long time. He disagreed and said, "You will not have her." The men did not argue with him, and the next morning, before light, they took the longboat and left. It was done quickly, and it was done with very few words, and Cheap was made to understand, over the course of a few minutes, that there was nothing he could do. 3 men held him. Bulkeley would later write that no force was offered to the captain beyond what was necessary to keep him from interfering. The captain stood on the sand while his ship's company put their stores into the longboat and the cutter alongside her and pushed her off into the surf. There were 68 men in the boats. Cheap was not one of them. The lieutenant of the Marines was not one of them. The surgeon was not one of them. A few of the older warrant officers were not. The youngest of the shipmen was not. And about 20 men had decided, when the moment came, that they would stay with the captain. They stood on the beach and watched the boat go. The boat went out through the surf line and into the deeper water of the bay. Bulkeley was the tiller of the longboat. The men at the oars pulled in time. The boats reached the headland and the sails went up, and they came around and stood out for the open sea. The men on the beach watched until the boats were gone. The captain did not speak. He stood by the storehouse. He stood where he stood 5 months earlier when he had fired that pistol, and he watched the boats become small. His coat was still pinned at the sleeve, His good hand was in his pocket. When the boats were out of sight, he turned and walked up the path to his tent. The men on the beach who had stayed with him went back to their work, as they had been ordered. The Wager's company was no longer one company. The two parties had different fates. On Bulkeley's longboat, the journey was longer and harder than he had imagined when he had drawn the lines on the canvas. The boat was overcrowded. The weather in the Strait of Magellan was as bad as the weather at the Horn had been. The men were on quarter rations. Men died of cold and hunger and were buried at sea. Other men, too weak to go on, asked to be set down on the shore, and were. They were not seen again. They lost the cutter. They lost more men to drowning. They reached the Atlantic in January, 6 months after they had left the beach. Of the 68 men who had left on the longboat, 30 made it to the Brazilian coast. They came ashore on the Rio Grande, half-starved, their boat broken under them. The Portuguese authorities took them in, fed them, and put them on a passage home. Bulkeley finally reached England in January of 1743, 28 months after he had sailed from St. Helens. He had his journal in his sea chest. He had his account of what happened. Cheap's party stayed on the beach for a time and then tried to go north. They had no boat large enough to carry all of them, and so they used the barge and the yawl, the two small boats that had been left behind. They put 20 men into them. They tried to row up the coast against the prevailing wind, and failed. They tried again, and failed again. The boats were too small, the coast was too rough, and the men were too weak. In the end, they were rescued by a party of indigenous Chilean people who came down the coast in their own canoes and agreed, in return for the surviving fragments of the Wager's metalwork, to guide the survivors north. The journey took months, and most of the men died on it. The midshipman who had stayed with Cheap, John Byron, was one of those who lived. The captain himself also lived. So did the lieutenant of the Marines and the surgeon. 4 men of the 20 who had set out reached the Spanish settlement at Chiloé in early 1743. They were taken prisoner. They were treated, in the manner of the time, as gentlemen, and they were held for 2 years. They were sent to Spain, and they were exchanged. Cheap reached England in the spring of 1746, 5 years after the wreck. By then, much had already been written. Bulkeley had not waited. He had published his journal in 1743 within months of his return, in collaboration with Cummins, the carpenter. The book set out his case. The Wager had been wrecked through no fault of his men. The captain had been disabled. The captain had then shot a midshipman in cold blood. The captain had then refused to consider the only practical plan for the men's survival. The men had taken the boat with regret and had not offered violence to the captain beyond what was needed to leave, and they had returned to England. They had rendered themselves to the Admiralty, and they were ready to be heard. The book sold. It went to a second edition, then a third. It was read in coffee houses. It was read in Admiralty. It made Bulkeley a known man. When Cheap reached England, he found that his version of events had already been told. He had his own to tell, and he told it. In his telling, the men had mutinied. The shooting of Cousins had been a captain's necessary action against an officer who had threatened the camp with armed force. The taking of the boat had been an act of plain mutiny against a serving captain in the king's service, and the men who had done it should hang. The Admiralty did not know what to do. A captain accused his men. The men accused him back. Both sides had their journals, and both sides had their witnesses, and the witnesses did not agree. There was a court-martial in 1746, and it was a peculiar court-martial. The Admiralty had decided, after long consideration, to try only the loss of the ship, the wreck. The actual question of what happened on the beach was set aside. The court found that the loss of the Wager was due to the negligence of the lieutenant on the watch, Robert Baines, who had failed to wake the captain in time. Baines was reprimanded. No one else was charged. The shooting of Cousins was not tried. The taking of the boat was not tried. The question of whether the captain had still been the captain after the wreck was not tried. The Admiralty had decided, perhaps, that the question was not one it wished to answer. To answer it one way was to send most of a ship's company to the gallows for an act that the public had read about in Bulkeley's book and largely sympathised with. To answer it the other way was to say, in open court, that a captain's authority did not survive the loss of his ship, and the Navy was not prepared to say that. So it was not said. The case was closed without being decided. Cheap was given a new command, the Lark, a frigate. He served in her for some years. He took prizes, he made money. He never again spoke publicly about the Wager, and he died, comfortable, in 1752. Bulkeley returned to private life. He wrote no more books. He had said what he wanted to say. He is thought to have emigrated to America in his later years, but the records are not clear, and the man who had been the gunner of the Wager fades into history. The young midshipman who had stayed with the captain, John Byron, made a long career. He rose to admiral. He commanded ships in 3 more wars. His own grandson became the most famous poet of his generation, and would write, half a century after the wreck, of a storm in the southern oceans, and of a boat overcrowded with starving men, and of what such men did to one another, in language his grandfather would have recognised. Byron the Admiral published his own account of the Wager in 1768, 27 years after the event. His account differed in several places from Bulkeley's. It also differed from his captain's. He was an old man by then, and the things he chose to remember and the things he chose to forget were his own. 3 accounts, 3 versions, 3 men who had been on the same beach at the same time, watching the same events and writing them differently. The wreck of the Wager was a small thing in the history of the Royal Navy. The ship was old, the mission failed, the galleon, in the end, was taken. Anson caught her 4 years later and came home a hero, and was made a baron. And the Wager was a footnote in the history of this voyage. Most readers of Anson's official account, when it was published, skipped past the chapter on the Wager. Most histories of the period mention her in a paragraph. But the question the wreck had raised did not go away. It returned in different forms, on other ships, in other centuries. When the chain of command is broken by accident, what holds men together? Whose word is law when there is no court to enforce it? What does a captain still possess when his ship is gone? The men of the Wager had answered the question among themselves, in their own way, on a beach in Patagonia. But they had not all answered it the same way. The 2 answers had divided them, and the division had taken some of them home, and the others not. And the survivors had spent the rest of their lives not agreeing on what had happened. The wreck did not only destroy a ship, it destroyed agreement. And the silence on the beach when the captain walked back up the path and his men did not follow him was a silence that the Royal Navy would carry inside itself, unspoken, for a long time afterwards. Well then, there you have it. If you've listened this far and like what you've heard, consider liking and subscribing. Also hit that notification bell to be notified of future stories. I release a new one every Sunday. As a new channel, it helps so much, not only in pushing these stories in front of more of you lovely people, but also reassures me I'm not just sending these off into the ether, never to be seen again. If you've listened this far and don't like what you've heard, then, what on earth are you doing? Right then, off you pop. Thanks for listening.